It is people who intentionally want to erase our collective memory.
Is because the city, in many ways, is unrecognizable.
We know that after the Lebanese civil war, we did not have anything to tell us the story of the civil war.
There's at least that chance that they could be turned into a marker, and the government doesn't really have to do much.
A lot of people don't want to lose their parking spots.
I know that the fate of the country doesn't rest on your shoulders, obviously. I'm not putting all of this on you.
I do believe that the project will continue, hopefully. And if it didn't, I think it's a lesson for us that we really need to change the decision makers. I do not believe in za'ama and leaders.
Soha Mneimneh, welcome to MTV.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Sitting where you're sitting, I've had urban planners, architects, activists. Recently, I sat with Mohammed al-Sham'a, who's sitting and talking about a research center that you were part of until a month ago, Beirut Urban Lab. I had Muna al-Halla, an architect turned, I think, best associated with Beit Beirut and more, Ras Beirut Initiative, an urban planner at heart. Bernard Khouri sat there speaking about his journey through architecture and post-war urban planning. And last night, until 3 a.m, I was on my electric scooter with a guest on my podcast, Rawi Haj, an author, not an urban planner, not an architect, has nothing to do with property. Magical realism, fiction, but really autofiction. And I stayed out with him after the recording, and we glided our way through Jaitewi, Rmel, Ashrafiye. I took him home to Siufi, and we were going through his childhood. And his childhood is the 1960s. And every single stop where he was pointing and remembering something, a lot of imagination was required. And I think the reason imagination is necessary is because the city, in many ways, is unrecognizable. And I think a lot of what storytellers do, and I'll consider you a storyteller, although that's not your technical profession, but storytelling and urban planning, I think they go hand in hand. And in our case, I think it's trying to preserve something that once shined and may not be shining any longer. We're going to get into your work, why you care about this place. I know that you've done research on several things that I'm curious about, including the silos, and that's the most pertinent issue. We'll also get into politics and some local politics. The silos, the government decision, or perhaps indecision right now, to knock down what's remaining of the silos, why it doesn't make sense to knock them down or build something in their place right now, and the wider story of where we are, which I think can be best described as paralysis that has impacted politics, economics, and in general, the well-being of Beirut and this country. So let's start with the silos. If you could tell me what your research involves, and really maybe the passion, the curiosity that made you become part of an Instagram page called Our City, Our Silos, which I think does its best to bring the silos back to life and also offer policy recommendations where there's a lot of that lacking. So sorry for the long introduction.
No worries. Actually, thank you for the long introduction. Actually, over a year ago, I became part of the Our City, Our Silos campaign, along with a group of journalists, of researchers, of engineers, of people from very different backgrounds. And what brought us together was knowing that the government wanted to demolish the Beirut port silos. And our first reaction was, no, this should be a monument that talks about what happened in the port and that tells the story of the August 4th. The first thing we did was to do a campaign to first raise awareness why we want to preserve the silos. We also wanted to hear from the people what they thought about the silos. Should they be kept or should they be removed? And of course, some people did say that they wanted the silos to be removed, but at the same time, we knew that for good recovery to happen, people need to see for themselves the things that what caused the trauma, and it should remain. Not because we wanted to remind them of the trauma, but we were hoping that one day accountability would be served, and that they would look at it as a monument of accountability, of political accountability, and to preserve the collective memory. We know that after the Lebanese civil war, we did not have anything to tell us the story of the civil war in terms of tangible architecture, I mean, except for just a couple of years ago, when someone decided to turn one of the buildings to Beit Beirut, the Museum of the Civil War. And we imagined something very similar to happen in the port of Beirut, where that tragedy happened. And we did not imagine how it will look like. We did not say, let's reconstruct it in a fancy way. We just said, people, when they think of the Beirut port blast, the first thing that comes to mind is the silos. So let's keep them to preserve that collective memory. Since then, I think we succeeded to sort of stop the demolition decision somehow, or delay it as much as possible over the past year or so. And today, the battle is ignited again with 2 steps. The first one is by the Minister of Public Works, who drafted a law for the governance of the ports in general in Lebanon. And the governance of the ports, he is actually putting himself the head of the main board that will do everything related to administration, and the board who will take all the decision related to that port. And to us, it's extremely problematic because we knew that he exactly wanted to demolish the Beirut port silos. And while he's writing and drafting that law, at the same time, he's working on master plans where he shows that he wants to demolish the silos, he wants to close the port completely the same way it was closed. And so that's one battle from one end. He's negotiating with the World Bank his own vision, which is very different from the World Bank vision. The World Bank did include opening parts of the port to the public, linking the port to the city somehow, because they attended a lot of meetings with people, and there were a couple of public hearings where the World Bank sort of showed their vision of all of the ports of Beirut, and like the general vision. It included the vision of Port Beirut. And people did say, no, we want the port. Everyone in the room, there were over 50 people, from experts, from residents, and they all said, we want the port preserved, the Beirut port silos preserved. You cannot think of a reconstruction plan for the port without including the silos as a primary element that should be preserved in the port.
Let me go as deep as I can. I know it's a very sensitive subject. It ties into many things that have gone wrong in recent years. And obviously the trauma and the explosion in itself and the wide-scale damage. So I know it's not an easy subject to explore as though it's just a science project. But I'm going to try to look at it and not take any sides here. More that 2-year anniversary of the August 4 blast, I recall this. Maybe you were there as well, walking with protesters throughout Beirut, and I think it was between Samir Asir and the highway. There was a march, and I was there, where the northern part of the silos crashed.
True.
And this was in the early afternoon.
True.
And I mean, in terms of coincidence and timing, you cannot come up with a more horrible way to celebrate or mark an anniversary with the silos getting further damaged. And I don't know, and I don't have the expertise or the knowledge for that matter, but I do try to read and catch up, and I followed your Instagram page. Is there anything that poses any threat with the structure that remains? In other words, I looked at the German plan that was first proposed. This could be months after the blast, where I think there was some care to what remains of the structure. And I don't know if that plan is even on anyone's bookshelf at the moment. It may have been phased out. You mentioned the World Bank Public Works Minister dance, let's say, whatever. But is there effort that has to be made to keep what remains intact? Does there have to be some actual work done? And if that doesn't happen, is there still a threat for what remains to actually crash and crumble, like we saw with the northern end? Sorry for being a bit naive with this, but...
No, not at all.
I drive by every day, or I whiz by on my scooter regularly, and it looks like what remains is going to stick around for some time, but I'm not sure if that's true. So how can that be addressed in the meantime? If the goal is to keep them and turn them into a marker later, what has to be done to at least preserve what's there?
Okay, so just to clarify, the silos, what remained from the silos after the blast was the northern and the southern side. The northern side, it collapsed because we predicted it was going to collapse if nobody intervened very quickly and they supported and reinforced the structure. But because nobody intervened, we saw it collapsing. And yes, indeed, we saw it collapsing. And I don't personally believe it's a coincidence that it happened on the August 4th, 2 years after the blast. Now, the southern side, we know that structurally it's sound and that it's not going to collapse soon. However, we know that the people who were responsible for emptying the silos from the remaining grains sabotaged the base of the structure
on the southern
way
side.
too much on the southern side.
Yeah.
And that was what pushed even the northern part of the silos to collapse. So the southern side is damaged. The base of the southern side is damaged too. We want like the governmental institutions to intervene quickly and to reinforce that structure. But there's no political will. I mean, we can talk for hours about the technical side of it, but it's really not technical. It's all political decisions to remove that monument. It is people who intentionally want to erase our collective memory.
The fires that were raging until, I think, the second year anniversary and the weeks leading up, those fires that were continuous, did that contribute in any way to the deterioration of the silos?
Of course, it contributed to the deterioration. And a lot of experts said that it's natural for the grains for the fire to happen because of the fermentation of the grains.
And the summer season.
Exactly. But there was a bid to remove all the grains, and that didn't happen. And we've been talking for over a year about cleaning and clearing the surrounding of the silos, but nobody wants to do that too. And I think that even if the fire happened, or actually when the fire already happened, a lot of experts also told us we couldn't put off the fire, true, but you could put it off somehow using some tools, like not in a very traditional way.
Other than the water that was being thrown on the fire all the time. There was the structure that is still there, the southern end, although, as you said, the base is not as sound. Is that, in your opinion, going to stay the way it is for the time being? In other words, is there any immediate threat right now to what remains of the silos?
I'm not sure, honestly, because no one's monitoring what's going on in the port right now with the port silos specifically. For a long time, we had access to the data related to the inclination of the silos. What we know is that if the silos are inclining, it happens exponentially. So the more we wait, the quicker it will.
And that's what happened on the northern side, that they sort of quickly, within days, and then suddenly on August 4, 2022, you have the northern side.
Exactly.
The reason I'm trying to understand the structural soundness of the silos, that's too many S's, is that I'm trying to see what could be the justification for not actually doing anything to keep them intact. If there's no decision made on how it will look, or for that matter, a replacement structure. And I think it's in our city, our silos, that it's even documented. You can't rebuild the silos there.
True.
The earth itself is damaged. So you'd have to actually relocate the silos. Assuming that that's the case, and assuming there's no political willingness to do what you suggested, which is have a monument, is there an intermediate way to kind of just keep what is there intact? Is that a minimum cost policy that could be advised and the government could potentially reluctantly maybe adhere to? Just a sort of a temporary measure to keep your side not, I don't want to say happy, but more that there's at least that chance that they could be turned into a marker, and the government doesn't really have to do much other than support what remains. Has any of that been discussed, or is that in itself off the table?
I just want to tell you what the Minister of Public Works actually did specifically, on how much the soil and the land can handle, the weight that it can handle, and the construction of new silos. In the beginning, the exact same minister was saying that we cannot keep the silos because the soil and the land does not handle the weight of the silos, of the current damaged silos. So that's why he wanted to remove the silos in the first place. Now, the exact same person, the exact same minister, is saying that he wants to remove the current silos to build new silos on the same site. And we know that this means more weight.
Yeah.
So he's sort of contradicting himself when he's saying that, which also proves again that it's not a technical issue. It's just a political decision that's happening somewhere, and then we're being told we need to remove them no matter what. And they're coming up with different excuses to implement what they want to implement, and to demolish that the silos. And I think it's not just about the silos; it's also about how the port in general, what the port will look like. Because they know that if we keep the silos, this means that they will have to open parts of the port. This means that they will have to have open spaces inside the port. And that's what they do not want to do.
Well, the way you're outlining, and I've heard this discussed more in terms of politics, less in urban planning, is access to transit sites in the country, and then preventing any reasonable investigation into exactly how ammonium nitrate went off, and eagerly or perhaps hoping that what's left of that site gets knocked down or falls on its head, seems more like this is a security problem, not a urban planning issue. And I don't know if that's going too far in the story, but does any of that resonate with you, that rather than just having a simple site that honors the dead, you end up doing these circular arguments with a minister who's speaking in double tongues. I don't remember the phrase for that. I think it's double tongue, if I'm not mistaken. He's saying opposite things at once. And you mentioned accountability at the start. The whole purpose of the story is not to keep silos up. It's to make sure that those types of crimes go punished. And that didn't happen.
True.
Do you think that the pressure is less on an urban planner and more on politics, security, and in a sense, almost like international crime? That this is not just a simple building that needs to be kept intact?
Absolutely, absolutely. At the same time, I don't think security is something different from urban planning. I do believe that you provide more security by providing more transparency, usually when we talk about digital, whatever. At the same time, this also applies to urban planning. We know that if certain open spaces were inside the port and you design the port in a certain way, I don't believe ammonium nitrate would have been stored if the port was a hybrid port, for example. It was designed that way. So I do believe that urban planning, the right way, can provide security. And it's by not closing the port completely. It's that simple.
I think you're in a way honoring the true meaning of that word, security, rather than the perverted version that ended up destroying the silos.
Of course.
And I like that it kind of brings me to another topic, and maybe we'll circle back at the end to August 4 and the port blast, but it offers a segue to the limits of someone like you. I know that the fate of the country doesn't rest on your shoulders, obviously. It's not, I'm not putting all of this on you. What I meant is what you best represent, which is the sincere activist that wants the state to function and function with some respect to its citizens. That's a very almost too basic of a goal, yet it's so hard to achieve in this country. And there's generations now of activists, urban planners, architects, even for that matter, civil society entering politics that reach a high wall that they cannot climb over. And this is where I want to get into your short journey. You're young, you're younger than me, but you're fully invested in this. Have you already experienced that kind of a wall? And from something as tragic as the August 4 port blast and trying to structure the silos and what's left of them and preserve that, to something very, very small. And it's just up the street. It's literally visible from the silos. Yet, it's the same paralysis. It's an intersection I cross every single day, and it's been about maybe 2 months that there's been no work. This goes back to your earlier chapter. You were in Beirut Urban Lab. I know that you didn't work specifically on this project, but maybe just some, I don't know, maybe some insight into why a little piazza just south of the silos is causing such a huge mess, both in traffic, lack of construction, political paralysis, arguments, AUB confronting MPs, all of that in one little intersection. So some background to the piazza. I know an AUB architect sort of dreamt of this idea, and in a way I think it's best honoring him. But I'll let you tell the story and what you think about that little microcosm of paralysis.
Yeah. Okay. So the Mar Mikhael piazza is actually a teeny tiny piece of a large master plan, and large master plans actually by Habib Dibis, the architect that you were talking about and mentioning. So Habib Dibis designed Plan Vert, Plan Lumière, if I'm not mistaken, too. And this master plan, it's a master plan of a greener Beirut in general. And it looks at opportunities, green opportunities in Beirut, and it highlights them and at the same time strengthens them. It finds this opportunity and it draws on them. And so what the Beirut Urban Lab did was to take one piece and try to implement that piece, which was the piazza of Mar Mikhael.
So sorry, that's one piece of a, like there would be replicas of that type of intervention?
It's not a replicas of intervention. This intervention specifically is along something called the Fuad Boutros Highway.
Oh, it's the end of Fuad Boutros.
Exactly.
Oh, right,
exactly.
right, of course.
So the Fuad Boutros Highway, for those who don't know the Fuad Boutros Highway, it's an unimplemented planned road that was supposed to cut through Mar Mikhael from the Hikmeh, from Hikmeh to the Mar Mikhael where the piazza is being implemented
and
now.
The bridge is standing alone without completion. There's a little park there at the moment, some nature and sort of foliage, fauna park. Yeah.
True. Because the municipality of Beirut, very funny, it's sort of, we say, it put العرب عملوا وضع يد or استملاك. So they sort of expropriated partially pieces of land and they expropriated fully other pieces of land. And other people are still in the threat of actually being displaced along that road, of the unimplemented planned road. And it was extremely problematic to keep it that way for decades. Yeah, I think it's been like that since the 70s or something.
The project is from the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that's it's the same.
Exactly.
Okay, so the master plan.
Exactly.
I see.
And so what Habib Dibis did was to take the Fuad Butrus highway and instead to propose a green path along these expropriated pieces of land.
I see.
And because there is, as you're saying, a lot of flora there are a lot of trees, empty buildings because people were kicked out when the municipality wanted to do the road. But anyway, so the Beirut Urban Lab took this tiny piazza and the lab wanted to implement it. And what happened is that they went through the process, the formal process through the municipality of Beirut. And while they were implementing, the Lebanese forces, people from the Lebanese forces started intervening. And they said, you cannot intervene without talking to us. However, the Lebanese forces, they do not, of course, represent everyone in the neighborhood. And what happened was the Lebanese forces started talking to the people and doing that war between the people and other people in the neighborhood, people who want the project, people who don't want the project, and between the people and between the experts. And what I believe is problematic, like watching all of this, is that the municipality of Beirut, not one municipal council member was on the ground or on the street, not the mayor, not the muhafiz, not anyone, to intervene and to put the clash to an end.
So can I just, my memory of it is a bit, maybe I got the narrative wrong. I thought the green light was given for the project.
It was given.
And that's why a lot of it is finished.
True.
Or not the cosmetics of it, but more the infrastructure. I think the pipes were installed, the pavement was rerouted, and the sidewalks were installed. And it felt like it was reaching a final stage of implementation. You mentioned Lebanese forces. Is that simply the MPs that represent that district got involved?
True.
So I'm trying to understand why this was not handled at the beginning between the municipality, Beirut Urban Lab, and those MPs. In your, maybe from your side.
MPs from the exact same political parties, they have a representative in the municipal council who gave the green light for that piazza to get implemented.
So what?
And now there's a clash inside that political party because someone said, you didn't talk to me. It's just egos. It's pure egos.
What is the, maybe it's best to ask them this question, but what is the rationale for stopping it 75% of the way? Is it an issue of rerouting traffic? Is it the construction in itself that's causing some issues? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what is the...
Yeah, me too. I thought that too. A lot of people don't want to lose their parking spots.
It's an issue of private parking.
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
And other people, they are not well informed about the project, so they think that it will cause more traffic. We know that it's not an issue of streetscape or sidewalks. We just need a functional public transportation system in Beirut for us not to have an issue of traffic.
It wasn't that the deviation was going in a fairly narrow road, and I know that that's the road we all use now, which is almost a perpendicular alley that does get congested. That's the only issue I've seen that causes inconvenience. But private parking, I guess that would be anyone's personal issue. Was there any discussion early on how to remedy that?
I believe it's completely political. I think these are all just justifications. It's just a temporary thing. It was just a project that was supposed, like the construction phase was planned for 2 months, and that's it. There was a rerouting. I'm sure
it's still there.
And it's still there.
Well, to be honest, it's less there now because people now park on the construction site.
Yeah. But I don't think that it's enough of an excuse to put such a project on hold, because people usually, we have construction sites everywhere in Beirut, and people, you have never seen anyone talk about, I don't know, a huge luxurious residential building blocking the streets because it's under construction.
That's true.
But suddenly it becomes a problem when someone's trying to fix the streetscape somehow.
I sense that this is going to stay as an unfinished project for the time being, which is a terrible outcome for a very small cosmetic initiative. This is not changing anything other than adding some breathing space to an intersection. It's not solving anyone's problems. It's not ending political paralysis. It's not bringing a president to Babda. None of that. It's just rerouting some traffic and putting some public space at an intersection, a piazza. I fear the worst, that it's going to be like this for a long time. Do you have any insight into where, if there are any negotiations happening? Because from what I've seen, since that standoff, it's been silence, and there's no resolution.
Yeah, actually, there are petitions from residents and engineers for the municipality of Beirut. They were given to the mayor too, to resume the project. And there are negotiations happening now. But I think that even if it did stop, we learned a lot from that specific site. And I do know that a lot of other research centers, other consultants, labs, engineers, architects, urbanists, they do plan, it sort of encouraged them to start implementing the whole master plan of Beirut that Habib Dibs did. And I know of another initiative which might happen also in Mar Mikhael to continue that strip and not to keep the intervention for that spot specifically. And so I think it was sort of a tactic for something to turn into a strategy on the long term. So we're seeing it as something small now, but there's a ripple effect happening somewhere. And I do believe that the project will continue, hopefully. And if it didn't, I think it's a lesson for us that we really need to change the decision makers and people in these governmental institutions, because it's ridiculous. They're completely absent, which is a complete disaster to me. They're just sitting in their offices and they're just watching the Beirut Urban Lab and some residents fight with other residents and the Lebanese forces. And that's the tragedy to me. Like they're turning people against each other in the first place.
Just to nail it on the head, though, you say Lebanese forces, that's because the MP is from that party, and that MP represents that district.
True.
So it's not a party issue, it's an MP's issue?
An MP along with a group of people who were organized with him somehow.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not. Why didn't you talk to us, the Lebanese forces? But at the same time, the Lebanese forces, some people in the Lebanese forces are saying that we approved the project. There was a representative in the municipal council. So, yeah.
Okay. I have never heard the whole story. That's why it's actually quite interesting to see why it stopped. But it also points at a larger problem. And I would put money on this. The fate of something very small is the same as the fate of something that defines our generation. The paralysis has destroyed Lebanon. I think it is also quite important that they face each other, and the silos and the piazza are meeting the same fate. Tarek Bitar hasn't been to his office for the better part of 2 years. A small little project of urban planning, it will be stalled, I think, for the time being. How it resolves itself may not be exactly the way it was intended, but I'm sure the resolution will not favor the more decent of activists. And this is where I want to get into slightly more sensitive terrain. You mentioned we have to change the people in these institutions. I'm trying to imagine a better crop of people right now that are representing the most decent of aspirations. I've spoken to so many of the new MPs. Not all of them, but the majority have been on my podcast or have sat here. And recently, Najat Saliba and Ziada Bishekar were both back-to-back. Not just them. I've spoken to Mark Daou, Wadah Sadiq. I've spoken off the mic to most of the rest, including Firas Hamdan, who I consider a friend. Even the ones that were in and out, like Rami Fenj, and I know Cynthia Zarazir. I don't get recorded when I'm talking to her. But I actually met her on the 2nd anniversary of the port blast. We were walking side by side when the silos were collapsing. Remove all the drama that involves Lebanese politics and maybe the cheesier stuff that gets tossed around on social media. Forget that. I think of the 13, I think all of them want a better Lebanon. Maybe their disagreements with older parties have pushed them to make decisions that may not be in everyone's, they may not be agreeing all the time on how to best agree on certain decisions. Maybe the biggest ones, they can't see common cause. But I think at the local level, they are there for the right reason. The ones that lost too campaigned for the right reasons. I trust them. And a lot of them are AUB figures. Most of them have studied there. Najat Saliba literally left the chemistry department and ended up sleeping in parliament. That's a direct road. That's a straight road. I believe it was chemistry. Was it chemistry? It was chemistry, not biology.
No, I'm not 100%.
I'm not 100%
sure.
anymore, yeah. But she was monitoring pollution levels from AUB, researching that. And now she's demanding a president in Baabda. It's the same woman. I don't know if you can get a better crop of people at this time in Lebanese politics. Last week, Georges Haes was sitting there, a member of the Lebanese forces. We spoke, half of the episode was about civil society. And he's actually a civil society activist who joined the Lebanese forces. That to me is a good thing, not a bad thing. So we have, I think, a lot of decent people. Yet the country continues to spiral. So I don't know about simply switching names.
Changing the people in power.
Changing people in power, I think the silos would still be the same way and the piazza would be in exactly the same position.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so let's go down this road as much as you'd like. I know it's a bit, I don't mean to put pressure on you, but more that, tell me your side, tell me your case of why what I'm saying doesn't resonate.
Okay. It doesn't resonate because I think it's not enough to just have 13 MPs in parliament for change to happen, right?
Sure, I was extending it to the reform-minded MPs that I think extend beyond the 13 too.
Yeah. And so you're talking about people who come from a background of research, academia, and all of that. People who've been in activism for a long time in general.
Even somebody, I mean, it's not maybe it's taboo to say this among civil society circles, but Georges Haes is a judge, an honest judge, and he joined an older party and he sees that as his road. But I don't think of him as any less worthy. And he's not of the 13.
I also don't think it's an issue of names, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think that the path should continue and we should think of ways to sort of penetrate governmental institutions, all of governmental institutions somehow. I definitely think that it's the lack of a vision, a unified vision and a unified identity somehow. And I don't mean that it's enough to say, I'm an activist, I'm from the 17th of October, Saura. It's not enough to me. I need to know what your values are, what your vision is, and I need these people to be unified under something, just one thing. And to me, this thing is the economic plan for the country for the next 20, 30 years or so. So
that would make the reform-minded MP do better? Is that... Let me say it differently. I should have mentioned... I forgot to mention him because it's been some time. I spoke to Ibrahim Mneimneh after he won the elections. Your family namesake. And he, to me, is a very principled, perhaps sometimes rigid too, but he doesn't want to compromise on his goal, which I admire. I can't think of somebody that better represents Beirut than Ibrahim Mneimneh, but I can't imagine someone like him achieving more either. I think he's achieving exactly what he can.
True.
So that's what I meant by, so what if you get more Ibrahim Mneimnehs? You'll end up in the same situation. So what you're saying is that I think, if I'm getting you right, other things need to change for those kinds of people to do better.
True.
Okay.
True. I think that they should have a unified economic vision at least, and they did not reach that place still. And I think after October the 7th, we saw these new 13 names, but each one had a completely different background. And we saw that I'm of course not against the completely different background, but they had completely different visions and completely different strategies and tools that they were using to at least close the gap in the economy, the current gap in the economy. And I think it's also because, again, they don't have a unified vision. They don't have a unified program. Right now, we're working on for the municipal elections that will happen in a year or so. And we all agreed that we need to have a unified program and then choose the people who are going to represent that program. We need to have a unified vision. And so we're sort of trying to join forces as much as possible to achieve that. And I think that was what we didn't do for municipal elections, but we learned from our mistakes. And that's what is important for me, is that we do self-criticism. And we knew what the problem was, and now we're tackling that problem from the beginning.
So then in that case, let me fast forward a bit, and it's kind of going to project to the next elections, municipal elections, but to build off of what happened 7, nearly 8 years ago, with the first municipal elections that brought a group like Beirut Medinati to the scene. Memory serves me right. That's how I got to know Soha Mneimneh, from those circles back then. I think he quickly put himself on the scene, and now he's an MP, and he's not in Beirut Medinati, obviously. But that kind of crowd included people like him back then. They lost. Do you think that a civil society-oriented team this round could actually win? And I don't mean win the way Beirut Medinati maybe won the message. Maybe they won a narrative, which is there is something that's needed. They did reach something like, what was it, 30-some% of the vote, which is a sizable number. And yeah,
less than 50, 40 something.
Was it in the 40s?
Yeah.
Sorry, 40s.
So it was too close, like they were about to win, but anyway.
Was it really? Maybe I don't remember that right. Okay. They were close. And the message was clear that the other side was going to nearly lose. So the messaging, I think they won the message. Do you think this time that they can actually win a majority and enter municipality? That seems to be the dream always of the urban planner entering politics, to leave AUB and go to the municipality, which I don't know if is exactly an upgrade. I think lower campus AUB has its own dilemma sometimes. You don't need to actually go to the municipality. But that seems to be the path. Yeah. Do you think that they could win this time? And it doesn't have to be them, not Beirut Medinati, obviously, but the new crowd, the October 17 grassroots parties. Do you think they have a chance?
I think it depends on the people who are organized in general, in groups and parties and new emerging groups and parties. So if we think that it's impossible, it will be impossible. If we think that it's possible and we can do something about it and we work for it, I think we do have a chance. But it depends on us, if we believe that we can or we can't do it. And so I do believe we can do it. A lot of people believe we can do it. Of course, a lot of people are frustrated. It's not la la land. I don't want to describe it as if we're all like completely okay and fine and functioning completely perfectly. Of course, we did mistakes, but I think that if we still have the will and we have a long-term vision for the country and we want to work towards it, I think we do have a chance to win the elections. And we'll see what's going to happen. I mean, we're talking about what might happen, but you can't really predict the future.
No, but I'd like to build from what you've experienced. I know that your more recent activism is not 2016, it's 2022. So maybe I can build from that a bit. What you've gained from being politically active, not necessarily at the national level. I would assume most of your work centers around Beirut, if not all of it. So that kind of being on the ground, seeing where votes are, where voters are, and where the messaging maybe doesn't always resonate fully. Is there anything you've learned from taking what you've learned from academia, trying to apply it to politics, that there's something that you could apply now and perhaps shape the municipal elections next year? Almost like a lessons learned, if there's anything you've gained.
I think the lessons I've gained is that there are two types of things that you can intervene on as a planner. You can intervene of the everyday basic stuff like lighting the streets, making the city greener, making the city more walkable. And there are the very big controversial issues like the port, like Solidaire, which Beirut Madinati sort of for a long time did not want to intervene on. And I think...
The port meaning post-port blast?
Yes, post-port blast.
That didn't want to intervene?
I mean Solidaire, like the big issues like Solidaire, because we can't talk about vacancy because some of the voters are probably shareholders in this.
I see.
So these very controversial issues, they should be tackled, like تدقيق الجنائي right now. We're talking about تدقيق الجنائي, that it's one part of the program of the municipal elections. And I think that if we're looking at how Beirut Madinati used to work, they wanted to make the city greener, nicer, but somehow they sort of wanted to stay away from these very controversial topics. And I think that now we need to work on both. And that's what...
You know what I remember, and it's interesting, not too long ago I spoke to Sarah Yassin, who ran for elections, but she left Beirut Madinati and then went on her own. That I thought Beirut Madinati was very able and more than willing to talk about local problems that include Solidaire, but not willing to talk about national issues, or for that matter, maybe even broach on geopolitical issues, that they kept things local. And during the recent elections in 2022, that was their first time at trying to expand the conversation. But I always thought that they were almost entirely anti-Solidaire. I can't remember one.
Of course, but some people, even if they're all anti-Solidaire, sometimes you can choose not to talk about being anti, or not necessarily. I don't want to say anti-Solidaire. I want to say against talking about the high rates of vacancy in
That's
Solidaire.
a better way of saying it. So, okay, so they were not willing to talk as much the first time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. And now you think that they're more comfortable talking.
Of course. Where there's a political battle, there's a political battle. And if we're going to tag ourselves politicians or activists, then we need to talk about these issues. We can't just pretend as if they don't exist and just talk about making the city nicer and greener and removing garbage from the streets. There are political battles, the Solidaire and the port specifically. If we tackle them and if we do our battles well, they can revive the whole city, like economically. They're the largest two pieces of land or districts in Beirut. So it's the port, it's the city center. And I cannot imagine anyone running for municipal elections without talking about these two zones specifically.
That's actually an eloquent way to wrap up the conversation, which allows us to go back to the port blast too. I think we're of the same generation. Maybe I'm a bit older than you, but we know the post-war years better than the war itself.
True.
I have memories of the 80s. I'm 42, which allows me to have some memory of the war. But my prime is not the war, it's post-war. I grew up, and all I heard about in the 90s was downtown, Green Line, Solidaire, Martyrs Square, L'Aswat, the National Theater, the Grand Theater, Wadi Abu Jmil, the Reclamation, Waterfront. And it was almost like you could have two voices in your head. The first is, let's say, profit-minded and betting on a stable future, a company man, an investor, but also somebody who's in politics. So you have the persona of Rafiq Hariri, who's sort of pointing in one direction and saying regional peace and stability will yield tangible results, and debt is short term. That's going back 30 years ago, even longer. So there's that kind of voice, not necessarily him only, but that's one voice on one side of the story. And the other side is somebody that I think is well-intentioned. It could be the Munahalla persona. She's not a politician. She doesn't carry that kind of... I think she's one of the best people in this country. And maybe for that reason, I like her to stay away from politics. I think she shines as she is. But there's that other voice, which says heritage, preservation, be mindful of the community, and cutthroat, profit-seeking, whatever you want to call it. Now it's more fancy. It's become neoliberalism, which I still don't really know what that means. But anyway, all the lexicon that emerged and is now taught in classrooms. And she's, I think, the best of that crowd, meaning the best meaning there's no malicious intent within her. If you go further down the road, you do have, I think, bad actors that wanted to just trash on Solidaire for their own reasons. Maybe they didn't have a nuanced argument to make. Maybe some of them were trying to get into politics too. Some of them even are disappointed that they didn't win more seats last round, and they thought putting up those solar lights in Barbour and Corniche and Mazra would make them win and enter the Sarai, without naming names here, but everyone I think would know who I'm referring to. That all he did was yell and blame Rafiq Hariri for everything. I don't think that's true. But that's more politics. Let's say you fast forward, and then you have municipal elections in 2016. Saad Hariri and Beirut Medinati, they can't work together. They work against each other. The Hariri team wins. That's nearly 3 decades later. And now we're still talking the same language, the same discussion. There's no Hariri in parliament or in power. That whole era is done. There's a decline from that momentum that was the early 90s. And I still hear, up until today, the same type of ideology that's blaming something that may not be individuals, and it may not even be parties. Maybe they're increasingly willing to blame paralysis and things that are transcending politics. That's very new. But I don't know if that's going to be the winning message long term, that we just need to get the old crowd out and put some new people in. That, to me, it still resonates in civil society when they discuss politics. I don't know if that really works in politics. And that's my way of trying to understand how you imagine a brighter future when the same issue that prevents Tar Bitar or anyone from accessing the port, or in my case, when I go in with MPs, when the port is on fire, the silos are on fire, they're being followed too by the same bad actors. They're not stronger. They're in the same situation. Or for that matter, any serious readjustment in Lebanon, so long as that security component is left unchecked, I don't see local aspirations taking off. And I see the better activist losing not just in votes, losing the narrative too. And that, I think, is a bad ending. So that's a very long-winded way of trying to wrap up the conversation. Why do you hold that kind of aspiration still? And maybe why you see it differently and where I'm seeing it wrong.
I do understand what you're trying to say, and I do agree somehow that it's not just about changing people and labels. I do believe that we need to not just have a unified program, but we need to grow and to develop as a political party too, if we want to go very aggressively into politics. And that should happen collectively. I do not believe in Zama, in leaders. And I think that's what these groups that emerged, what was different about them somehow. And I do accept the fact that maybe looking 10 years from now, this political party might become a very classic, traditional Lebanese sectarian political party. And for this current state of time, like right now, I'd rather work because I want to see something happen than to think about the worst case scenario that might happen 10 years from now. So yes, indeed, it might happen 10 years from now. The October 17th groups, parties, whatever, the outcome might be catastrophic, even worse probably than the current sectarian political parties. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. It might not be that bad. But for the time being, yes, I want to do that battle. And I want to see change happen. And I know what the tools are. And that's why I'm still doing what I'm doing here in Lebanon. And I insist on doing it in Beirut. Because I grew up in Beirut. I'm a Beiruti. I grew up in Beirut. And I love Beirut. And I want to see Beirut better. I want to see Beirut better, and I want to see its people better, and I don't want to see it suffering. And I've studied it for so long, and it would be just even more tragic for me to just study it without doing anything about it, and to research it, and to know what the problem is and what the solution is, and just to stay in my office or in academia and say, hey, this is the problem, and that's the solution. Yalla, go figure it out, people, you know? It's not a life worth living to me.
I share that feeling. Yeah. And just in under an hour, it's quite interesting to shape a journey that exposes just how determined a civil society person can be in pursuing the right thing against all odds, even when battles are lost repeatedly. You still head in the right direction regardless. I think that's deeply admirable, and that is the right way forward. I also see a civil war that destroyed downtown, a solidaire that came and went. Whatever is left of it is not the solidaire that was once conceived. A city center that's dead again. A port that was restored after the war and expanded. Somehow those silos survived the better part of the fighting, damaged a bit in the late 80s, but quickly put back together. That southern end was fixed, and now we have rubble. And still, until today, civil society demanding the right things when the political landscape moves in a completely different direction. Maybe that's the narrative too, that you always have that kind of person determined against all odds. But it comes from urban planning. I think the most passionate civil society activists turned politicians can all be traced back to AUB. And I think whatever AUB is doing, it's producing that kind of commitment. So that's my way of honoring you and what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I hope you're right long term. With that, thank you for spending an hour with me.
Thank you.
On MTV.
Thank you. Thank you.